Do you ever feel like the world's getting crazier and the people in charge keep telling us to just wait for help? Yeah, me too. But here's what they don't broadcast. Ordinary Americans are out there right now using their Second Amendment rights to stop crime waves in their tracks. From concealed carriers dropping threats in public to homeowners turning away armed intruders, real defensive gun uses are happening daily. Studies put it in the hundreds of thousands yearly. Yet the focus stays on the rare tragedies. As a wife and mom, that gap bothers me. So let's talk about the quiet victories, because they might be coming to a neighborhood near you. Up next, a specific case where one citizen's quick action halted what police called a growing crime wave and proved why waiting isn't always the answer. Look, I've been a nurse long enough to see what real emergencies look like up close, and lately, the ones that scare me most aren't happening in the hospitals. They're happening in living rooms, parking lots, and quiet neighborhoods across America. While politicians debate common sense laws, ordinary citizens, moms, dads, retirees, are stepping up with their firearms and stopping armed intruders, carjackers, and even would-be mass threats. Now here's the part most people don't realize. Hundreds of these defensive gun uses happen every month. Yet the mainstream media barely even mentions them. That gap creates a false sense of helplessness. But the reality is very different. Law-abiding gun owners are literally preventing crimes from escalating. And that's not theory. It's happening right now in communities just like yours. This is why we need to shift how we see crime prevention. It's not always uniforms and badges. It's preparedness, vigilance, and the courage to act when seconds count. Today, we're going to look at the stories that rarely get told, the quiet victories, the hidden heroes, the ordinary Americans proving that the Second Amendment is more than words on paper. It's a tool for life-saving action. Stick around because the first story we're about to share involves a string of home evasions in 2025 that were shut down before the police even arrived. And it's exactly the kind of scenario that makes you reconsider what safety really means in your neighborhood. Before we dive in, drop a comment below. Have you ever thought someone you know might already be quietly stopping crime without the world knowing? All right, let's start with a quiet suburb in 2025. Just the kind of neighborhood where you leave your kids at the bus stop without a second thought. Over a few nights span, several homes were hit in a string of burglaries. The usual news coverage? Barely a mention. But here's the part most people won't tell you. One homeowner, his name is Dave Jessup, noticed something was off. Now, Dave isn't a former SWAT officer or a security expert. He's just a normal, middle-aged dad, works a 9-to-5, and keeps his family's safety seriously but quietly. One evening, he saw a masked figure trying to jimmy his neighbor's door. Without hesitation, Dave grabbed his legally owned handgun, stepped outside, and confronted that intruder. The criminal fled, but the action didn't stop there. Dave's quick thinking and willingness to act sent a ripple effect down the street. Other would-be burglars, seeing the neighborhood was alert and armed, they backed off, and the multi-house burglary wave came to an abrupt halt before the police even arrived. Here's why this matters. What Dave did wasn't reckless. It was calculated, calm, and very effective. It's an example of defensive gun use in real life. Ordinary citizens stepping up, often quietly, to prevent escalation. And notice something else. The mainstream media barely acknowledged it. If you didn't know, it would have looked like nothing happened at all, feeding the false narrative that crime is unstoppable and ordinary Americans are just helpless. So let's think about this. If someone in your neighborhood quietly stopped a crime, would you ever hear about it? Comment below with what you would do in that moment. Would you intervene, or would you wait for law enforcement to arrive? Up next, we'll examine another case, this one in a public space where seconds counted and the stakes couldn't have been higher. It's the kind of scenario that proves defensive gun use isn't just about homes. It's about real people protecting others in real time. Now let's move from homes to public spaces. This story takes place in a busy shopping center, people browsing stores, kids in strollers, and shoppers oblivious to the danger about to unfold. In late 2025, a man armed with a handgun attempted a robbery at a local jewelry store. The situation could have escalated in seconds, putting dozens of people at risk. Enter Maria, a teacher and a single mom who carries her firearm legally. She wasn't looking for trouble, but she was alert, aware, and prepared. When the robber pulled the weapon and demanded cash, Maria didn't panic. Instead, she positioned herself safely, drew her handgun, and issued clear verbal commands to de-escalate the threat. That robber froze, surprised by the immediate defensive response, and eventually fled empty-handed, leaving the shoppers unharmed. Here's the part you won't see on the news. Incidents like this happen hundreds of times each year, but most are never reported. To the public, it might seem like nothing happened. But in reality, Maria stopped what could have become a multi-victim incident in real time. That gap between reality and coverage is exactly why most people underestimate the power of ordinary citizens stepping up. Think about that for a moment. Maria had seconds to assess risk, calculate angles, and act decisively under pressure, something most people can only imagine in movies. But this was real life. Law-abiding gun owners are preventing tragedies every day, even if the headlines never show it. And why does this matter? Because defensive gun use isn't only about protecting your home. It's about being ready to act when unexpected threats arise in everyday life, regardless of where you're at. Maria's story shows that ordinary people, equipped with knowledge, training, and the courage to act, can make a dramatic difference in moments that last just seconds. Next, we'll break down the psychology behind why ordinary people succeed in these situations and uncover hidden truths that law enforcement and mainstream media rarely admit. So when you step back and look at stories like Dave's and Maria's, a bigger question starts to emerge. What separates the people who act from the people who don't? Because here's the truth. Most Americans aren't trained police officers. They aren't tactical experts or security professionals. They're just like me and you. They're parents, workers, retirees, nurses, people just living their lives. Yet in moments of crisis, some of those same ordinary people suddenly become the line between danger and safety. From my perspective as an RN, that dynamic is actually very familiar. In emergency medicine, we see the same pattern over and over again. When something unexpected happens, whether it be an accident, a medical crisis, or a sudden trauma, the people who make the biggest difference usually aren't the ones with the most authority. They're the ones who stay calm enough to recognize what's happening and take action before things spiral out of control. And that, my friends, is exactly what you're seeing in these defensive gun use cases. First, there's awareness. Dave noticed something unusual in his neighborhood and acted instead of brushing it off. Maria recognized a threat developing in a crowded store before most people even realized what was happening. Situational awareness is often the first thing that interrupts a criminal's plan. Most criminals rely on the opposite. They rely on distraction. They rely on people assuming someone else will deal with the problem. And mostly, they rely on hesitation. If that situation happened 10 feet in front of you, in a store, a parking lot, or even on your own street, what do you think your first reaction would be? Would you notice the warning signs early, or would you realize what was happening only after things had already gone wrong? Second, there's preparation. Dave had a firearm accessible in his home. Maria carried hers legally and had clearly spent time learning how to use it responsibly. That preparation doesn't mean someone is looking for confrontation. They're not looking for trouble. In fact, it usually means the opposite. Responsible gun owners spend a lot of time thinking about how to avoid conflict, de-escalate danger, and protect life if there are no other options. Preparation reduces panic. And when panic goes down, clear thinking goes up. Third, and this is the part that often surprises people, there's confidence built through familiarity. The reason Maria could issue commands calmly during that high stressful robbery wasn't because she was suddenly fearless. It's because she had already mentally prepared herself for the possibility of danger. When your brain has rehearsed a situation before, it reacts very differently when that situation actually becomes real. But here's where the conversation gets even more interesting. Despite stories like these happening across the country, most Americans rarely even hear about them. The news cycle focuses heavily on tragedies, which are obviously important to report. I'm not saying they're not. But that focus can unintentionally create a distorted picture of reality. Because behind the scenes, there are hundreds of defensive gun uses happening every month. Many end exactly the way Dave and Maria's did. No one got hurt, a criminal was stopped, and life moved on quietly afterwards. No national headlines, no viral news segment, just ordinary people preventing something worse from happening. And that raises an uncomfortable question for a lot of policymakers and media outlets. What if the role of responsible citizens in stopping crime is far bigger than we've been led to believe? Because if that's true, it changes the entire conversation about public safety. And to understand why some people rise to the moment while others freeze, we need to talk about something even deeper, the psychology of fear. To really understand why people like Dave and Maria were able to act when others might freeze, we have to look at something deeper than training or tools. We have to look at how the human brain responds to sudden danger. When a threat appears unexpectedly, the brain processes it through a part of the nervous system often called the survival response. Most people are familiar with the phrase fight or flight, but psychologists actually describe a third reaction that's just as common: freeze. Freezing happens when the brain is overwhelmed with information. The mind is trying to process movement, sound, danger, and the possible outcomes all at once. And in that moment, the brain essentially pauses while it tries to decide what to do next. From a medical perspective, this is completely normal. In emergency rooms, we see people freeze during traumatic moments all the time. A family member collapses, a car accident happens, or someone is seriously injured. And the people nearby often stand still for a few seconds because their brains are trying to catch up with reality. The problem is that criminals often rely on that moment. Many crimes depend on surprise and speed. The criminal assumes the victim will hesitate long enough for the crime to succeed. That hesitation creates a window of opportunity. But when someone responds immediately, even with something as simple as clear verbal commands or defensive posture, that window disappears. And that's exactly what happened in the stories we talked about earlier. Dave didn't wait to see how things might play out, and Maria didn't assume someone else would intervene. Both of them moved from awareness to action faster than the criminal expected. Here's something interesting that rarely gets discussed. Criminals usually target environments where they believe resistance will be low. They look for distracted people, isolated areas, or places where everyone appears passive. It's a calculation, whether they want to admit it or not. When a responsible citizen interrupts that calculation, it completely changes the equation. Suddenly, the criminal is no longer dealing with a passive target. They're dealing with uncertainty, risk, and the possibility of consequences that they didn't anticipate. That shift alone is often enough to stop the crime before it escalates. Let me pause here for a second and bring this back to something personal. As a nurse, and honestly as a mom, I think about how people prepare their families for emergencies all the time. Most of us teach our kids basic safety habits. We show them how to dial 911. We tell them what to do in a fire or how to find help if they get lost. Those preparations don't mean we expect things to happen. They simply mean we understand that being prepared reduces panic when something unexpected does occur. When someone has thought through how they would respond to danger, even in a simple way, the brain moves through that initial freeze response much faster. It recognizes a situation more quickly and begins acting instead of hesitating. And that brings us to an important point that often gets lost in the national debate about crime and self-defense. The presence of responsible, prepared citizens doesn't just change what happens during a crime. It can change whether that crime happens at all. Because criminals are constantly making risk calculations. They're looking for easy targets and predictable environments. When those assumptions are disrupted, even occasionally, it sends a signal that the environment is less predictable than they thought. And unpredictability is something criminals tend to avoid, which leads to a bigger question. If ordinary citizens are quietly stopping crimes, disrupting criminal calculations, and protecting their communities more often than people realize, why don't we hear about these stories very often? It's because the answer to that question leads directly to the bigger insight in this entire conversation. So when you step back and look at everything we've talked about, the stories, the psychology, the patterns of criminal behavior, a bigger picture starts to emerge. Crime doesn't just happen because of opportunity. It happens because of expectation. Criminals calculate risk, and they expect most people will hesitate, freeze, or comply. That expectation is their advantage. But here's the thing. When responsible citizens are present, aware, prepared, and ready to act, that expectation starts to crumble. And that's the hidden deterrent almost nobody talks about. Think about it. How often do you hear about crimes that never happened because someone nearby disrupted the plan? That's right. Probably never. Millions of potential incidents are quietly stopped every year, without headlines, without media coverage. Now let me ask you something. Imagine your own neighborhood. If a criminal knew there were people who were alert, trained, and willing to intervene, how would that change their behavior? Would they risk it? Or would they move on to somewhere easier? That mental exercise is exactly what makes this so powerful. Prepared citizens don't just act. They create uncertainty. And uncertainty is the kryptonite of criminals. They hate it. They avoid it. Even the possibility of resistance rewrites the odds in favor of safety. And here's a viral truth that few people ever hear. Criminals don't just fear police. They fear ordinary citizens who refuse to be easy targets. That fear alone prevents countless crimes every day. And it almost never makes the news. Which brings us to the real insight. The Second Amendment isn't just about rights on paper. For millions of Americans, it's a practical tool for life, family, and community protection. The difference between helplessness and prevention often comes down to awareness, preparation, and the courage to act. And when communities embrace that mindset, the effect multiplies. Neighborhoods become safer, not because someone is watching from a patrol car, but because the people who live there refuse to be passive. They refuse to be victims. So the next time you think about crime prevention, remember this. Sometimes the quiet, prepared hero in your own neighborhood is the single most effective deterrent against violence. And it's happening every day, without anyone mentioning it. So what does all of this mean for you, your family, and your community? It means that being prepared isn't paranoia. It's practical, life-saving awareness. The stories we've covered aren't just isolated incidents. They're proof that ordinary people, when aware and ready, can prevent harm and protect their loved ones. Every neighbor who notices, every parent who plans, every citizen who refuses to be passive, each one is quietly reshaping the safety of their community. And here's the part that most people miss. You don't need to be a superhero to make a difference. What matters is attention, preparation, and the courage to act when it counts. That's how millions of crimes are prevented without ever hitting the news. If you're watching this, ask yourself, what could you do differently in your own home, in your neighborhood, or even at your workplace to make sure you're part of that deterrent? Pause and think about that. Because the truth is, the first line of defense isn't always a siren or a patrol car. It's the people who are already there, refusing to be easy targets. And that brings me to something I'm really excited about for our next video. We're gonna dive into Moms with Guns, empowering women against crime. Stories of everyday women taking responsibility for their families and neighborhoods in ways that are inspiring, practical, and incredibly effective. So stay tuned, because these quiet heroes aren't just protecting themselves, they're showing the rest of us how it's done. I'll see you next time. Bye.